Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hi there. Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. My name is Jon Sanders, one of the co-hosts and co-founders of EntrePastors podcast. And we're coming to you with episode number 97 this week. And this episode, we're going to talk about a problem we see many pastors having, maybe one of the few major roadblocks we see pastors struggling with to overcome as they think about establishing another line of income for their family. And it really gets down to this idea of being overworked already. Like, I don't have enough time to launch a business and be a pastor. Jon, I'm already having enough time keeping up in my pastoral duties as it is. Now you and Les are suggesting that, I launch a business in order to make more money for my family. How in the world would I ever accomplish that? Well, in this episode, we're titling this one, How to Free Up Your Time for Marketplace Ministry. And we're going to talk about exactly that. This is more of a church conversation about delegating inside of the church. So this is not so much a business-focused podcast as it is a church leadership-focused podcast where we're going to talk about how you delegate. I know if you've read any books on leadership, you've probably come across that theme of needing to delegate. This is going to talk about how you actually do that. In this episode, I'm going to share a story of when in my journey, my pastoral journey years ago, I made a monumental shift where I decided that I was no longer going to be the one doing all of the work in the ministry. Instead, I was going to be a leader of leaders and hand off a lot of work in the ministry to other capable people around me, thus freeing me up to focus on the parts that I was most passionate about and really gifted for. And as you find that margin or really create that margin in your life, you can then give yourself to other things, including launching a business. So this is going to be a great conversation between me and my co-host, Les Hughes. We're excited to share it with you now. Here we go. Let's do it.
I love the topic that we're talking about today, though.
Yes, sir. Today, we're going to deal with one of the biggest questions that we get asked all the time, or maybe not questions, but roadblocks that pastors bump into. We're going to title this episode, How to Free Up Your Time for Marketplace Ministry. That's probably one of the biggest buts, objections. How do I do this, Les, that you and I hear from pastors as we're coaching them and encouraging them to launch a business? It's this idea of, Jon and Les, that sounds great, but I am already overworked. I'm already working way too much in just my ministry role. And now here you guys are proposing that I launch a business. How in the world would I ever find time to be out in the marketplace when I can't even keep my head above water on the church side of things? So really what we're going to focus on today is more the pastoral side of things. This will all apply to business as well, Les. We can maybe bring that back at the end. But
yeah,
really want to have this conversation from the angle of pastoring a church and how do you free up time? Because would you agree with this statement, Les, that a lot of pastors, probably the average pastor, is way too busy doing stuff that they honestly should not be doing inside the church?
I mean, we've talked about this, so I know what you're saying. What I would say is that there's reasons to hand some of that stuff off. There's nothing wrong with you doing it. You can do it. You can do it like you like it. You can have it your way. And you know what, Pastor, you probably can do it certainly quicker and maybe even better. You can define what better means, but there are many more reasons to hand something off. And we can talk about some of those today. And Jon, I think that we ought to start with, there's a couple things going on here. One is we don't just, we want to be real strategic about these podcast episodes. We appreciate people taking time to listen. And so we're not just bantering back and forth. We have fun, but we want to get down to practical business that are going to help them reach their goals. And one of the reasons we're talking about this one is that, first of all, a lot of guys verbalize this. Even if they don't verbalize it, there is a it causes a check in your spirit when you start thinking about adding things to your plate, and they may already think that they're neglecting, their family around them because of the busyness and because of their schedule. And it's easy to get in this mode of reacting and fighting fires, in ministry. But this is a way that you can be more proactive and really take control of things and be more self-disciplined about it. So let's just start by you sharing about why this is so near and dear to your heart, because it's personal for you.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, before I tell the story, Les, let me back up just at the high level and share this with our audience, is that we have created a course that we've put inside of our Pastors Business Alliance, and we'll talk more about that as we're signing off the show. The name of the course, though, is A Pastor's Guide to Delegation, and the subtitle of that is 12 Keys to Unlock the Time Freedom to Build Your Business. And Les, just a minute ago, you mentioned family. Maybe it isn't even I need time to build my business. Maybe it's I need time for my kids to remember who their dad is, and or for my wife to remember who her husband is, and actually get to spend some time with my family. So again, the margin, what you do with the margin that's created as a result of how we are serving you, and some of the practical application of this is entirely up to you. But also, this can be utilized to launch a business. So here's the story, Les, for me. And I created this course many years ago after experiencing a tremendous amount of success in my own ministry, and then realizing as I started coaching and speaking into the lives of other pastors, man, I wasn't alone in this struggle. Like, this is a pretty common thing that pastors deal with. And so the story goes like this. I'll just give you the high level version of it. We were just a few short years into our church plant, and things were going pretty well. The church was growing, but very quickly I was on a path to burning out, because I was in that probably traditional, very much expected role model, if you will, where, hey, the pastor does all the work of the ministry. That's why our pastor is full-time, is because he does all the work, and then we'll just come on Sunday and watch what he has done and prepared for us in the week, and then we'll all go home and let him keep doing all the church stuff. And that's where we were. It was me and my wife, and maybe just a very small handful of some other friends that were involved in some of the leadership of our church. But we were tired. We were quickly growing tired of having such a small group of people doing all of the work of the ministry. And it brought me to this place of saying, man, if something doesn't change, I can't keep this pace. It's not sustainable. And I was encouraged by a mentor of mine at the time to the simple answer, it's delegation. It's start handing things off. The way we did it was more nuanced, though, where we actually had, this is where we started to develop what we called our staff. Like, we actually developed staff roles within our church that were defined. There were written job descriptions for them. And here's the end of the story. I'm just going to fast forward through all the stuff in the middle and say, here's the result of this. When I actually started handing off work in the ministry to other qualified people, that I took the time, I slowed down enough to take the time to identify them, recruit them, train them, all of the stuff. And I actually started to lead leaders instead of be the one that's doing all the work in the church. It was at this point that our church plant exploded in terms of growth. We went into a very exciting season where on the graph, everything was moving up and to the right. It was a really fun time to be pastoring in the years following this process that I implemented. And I didn't come up with this. By the way, it's kind of biblical. Like, it's kind of laid out in scripture, where we're told that God gave leaders to the church to equip the saints for works of service. Somewhere along the line, we interpreted that to be, hey, hire a pastor and let them do all the work. And then or why they're frustrated and burned out. But
even going back before that, John, the Old Testament model with Moses trying to, mitigate every, struggle and conflict that the people were going through. And finally, God called him out and said, you've got Jethro over here. He could do some of this. There's some things that Jethro can't do, but that you need to do, but he can do this. And so he took that off of Moses's plate.
Well, Jethro came out to Moses and said, what you are doing is not good. And I think, I think there's some Jethros. Hopefully you and I can be that Jethro to some pastors today to say, hey, pastor, what you are doing is not good. We know Gladys expects it, but this is about longevity and ministry and obedience to your calling to God, not keeping Gladys happy. So what you're doing is not good. We need a better plan.
And I love the fact that the Lord blessed all that, got more people involved. People were able to use their gifts instead of you just doing what you could, to get it all done. And this is for probably maybe even a different conversation, but just at a high level, I know the pushback that a lot of high level leaders and type A, especially type people have. It's like, yeah, but you just don't get it. I'm good at this, or it needs to be done. The only way I can guarantee it gets done is if I do it. Yada yada yada. The fact is that there are different kinds of delegation. When we use the term delegation, it's not completely just always passing off something to somebody else. There is that kind of delegation on one extreme where you say, I don't want to hear about this again until it's done. That's one extreme. The other extreme is I'm going to hold your hand the first time through every step of the way, and then I'm going to give you a little more latitude, a little more freedom, and it's a longer process. And then in the middle is, hey, let's meet every week and talk about where you are on that. I don't want to hear about it during the week, but on Wednesdays at 2:00, let's talk about it and see where you are. Or there's certain milestones. So when we say delegation, we're not talking about shirking responsibilities or just giving people busy work to do. There's a system and there's a process to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in the course, we go deep into that. Like, how do you identify the right kind of people? How do you equip them and train them? So I think that's a mistake that leaders have made often, especially in the church world, is as soon as we find someone with a pulse and the ability to fog a mirror, they're willing to serve in a certain area, we're just like, great, take it. We dump it on their shoulders, and then we scratch our head and wonder, why did they leave our church, 8 months later? Why did they step down feeling like they totally failed? It's like, well, we didn't actually train them. We didn't really lead them. We just dumped some stuff on them and hoped that they would run with it. There's another side to that coin too, Les, and I think sometimes pastors, not always, but sometimes pastors get into ministry for the wrong reasons. There's a sense of that need to be needed. And so, man, like to hand something off to other people, and therefore I'm no longer as needed to get something done. That's real. It's not healthy, but it's a real thing that's there. And pastor, if that lands with you, man, we need to get you some help. Seriously, we need to get you some counseling around that. We need to get some introspection to say, that's not healthy leadership, to need to be needed, and therefore to keep holding on to stuff that really isn't yours to hold anyway. Like, God's probably gifted you with a handful of things that you really do well in the body, and there's probably a bunch of things you're doing because you've had to up to this point, but someone else can probably do them better. If not, they can do them at least 80% as well as what you're doing, and that's good enough. And they'll thrive if you hand that off to them and let them run with it. So
that's good.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the course that's inside Pastors Business Alliance that we'll give more details on at the end of this episode. But so we can't cover all of it. There's a lot of content here, but we do want to kind of put in some big rocks and help people at least. Maybe we can help them to know whether this is for them or not. But we certainly, if all they do is listen to this episode of our podcast, then we want them to be able to take what we teach and really put it into practice beginning like right now. So where does this start? So take us from the top and cover a couple of these lessons for us.
Yeah, well, this is going to sound a little bit abrasive, but what I tell pastors that want to learn how to delegate and how to free up more of their time and have margin in their life is, the first thing, pastor, is you have to stop being a full-time pastor. And I put air quotes around that because I'm not telling you to like give up your salary or, quit your job at the church. I'm not saying that. But Les, you and I speak a lot about this model, this very traditional model in the Western part of the world in modern history that, when we talk about full-time pastoring, most of us know what that means. It's a pastor who has a full-time job in the church. And we've talked at length about how that model, although it's not wrong, it's not immoral, it's not sinful, it has created some unintended consequences that have not been good. Certainly not for the pastor. And also we would contend the church is suffering as well. And this is part of it. Like the fact that we've created this model where where pastors operate under this, well, I'm full-time. And then the people sit back and go, well, we have a full-time pastor, so that's not my job. Like, that's why we pay you, pastor. This has been detrimental in the church, I believe. Like, it has stunted the growth of not just churches in terms of numerically, but it has stunted the growth of believers, because there's certain gifts that they were supposed to, God's will is for them to be developing and honing those gifts. And we've got some paid professionals going, well, I guess that's my job, I'll take it. And so, pastor, we need you to stop being a full-time pastor. We need you to start thinking differently about your role as a pastor. And if you think about, this is a really big thing here, Les, but so much of the way we in the West think about church and approach the church is we are creating our members to be consumers, and we're looking to the pastor to be the primary producer, and that model needs to be blown up. And so I hope pastors, as they're hearing this, realize that so much of what is behind EntrePastors is not just helping pastors make more money. This is really about the health of the church, because if we can get pastors to make this adjustment, I believe that the benefits are going to be far beyond that pastor just having a new stream of revenue for their family. That's great. But we're going to see some churches getting healthy because we're going to have leaders going, wait a minute, I need to slow down long enough to work in my church instead of or work on my church, so to speak, rather than just working in my church. Like, most pastors probably wake up every day and they're just running circles in their church instead of slowing down long enough to change the paradigm a little bit, change the model a little bit, and start working on their church. And that's what this looks like. Step number one is stop being a full-time pastor. That also, Les, if I can say one more thing, brings about a lot of expectations that the average church member places upon the average pastor. Again, there's just kind of an expectation of all the things that I expect you to provide for me, pastor, that may not actually be God's design for what the role of pastoring was supposed to look like. I would point to Ephesians chapter 4 again. The role of the leadership of the church is to equip the saints for works of service. It is the saints that are called to do the works of service. It is the pastors who are called to do the equipping. And yet this full-time model has many pastors doing the work of the ministry while the saints sit back and expect more and more and more from their pastors. So I'll take a breath and let you jump in there.
Well, as you're saying that, I'm envisioning what those conversations, those early conversations look like in the personnel team meeting, or the budget and finance, or a deacon and elders type meeting, where the old boy is, crossing his arms and leaning his chair back against the wall and saying, this guy has never come across to me as lazy before. So what is going on here? So how important is it? And I'm not saying that would always happen, but how important is it to have, and what do those early conversations need to look like for the pastor or the person with a ministry background or the missionary that's got a board to be accountable to? What are those? How important is it to have some early conversations with trusted confidants, trusted individuals that have your best interest at heart, about what that can look like?
Well, what could look like? Are you saying like what it would
about
look like?
What the process of delegating a lot of that looks like. If you're all of a sudden, if you've been the one doing the work and now all of a sudden you're delegating it to other people.
Oh, I see.
So
you're saying maybe there's a board member potentially sitting back going, well, why is our pastor handing everything off to volunteers now?
And potentially an influence. This is real talk, it potentially an influential one.
Yeah. Right. So again, if to whatever degree that's happening, that says a lot about the mindset of that, said board member or whatever, and shows a lack of understanding of what leadership is, which, by the way, that's not a shocker that you have people on many boards in churches across the country who are not leaders, who do not understand leadership, and yet somehow the church has put them into a leadership role. So this is a very real possibility a pastor could find themselves up against, is that they're answering to a board who does not understand leadership. And the simple answer, Les, is this is an opportunity for leadership. It's an opportunity for the pastor to lead and to disciple and say, well, we're going to need to talk about that. Let me show you some things here.
There you go.
According to God, this
to
was never my goal. This was never my job to do all of this work. It was my job to equip others to do this work.
Yeah, I guess that's perfect. And because there's an education that might need to take place, there is a persuasion that may need to take place, not in a manipulative way, but just to see, kind of help people see the big picture. So what I'm trying to get around is a confrontation in the church lobby. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
There may take some patience, but the other side of it is at some point it'd be time to fish and cut bait, but you enter into that with a lot of prayer and preparation, and you build some relationships up, so that people will assume the best instead of believe the worst.
And I think when people start hearing a vision for this, naturally they get it. This isn't about a pastor doing less work. This is about a pastor doing more of the right work that they've been called to do and that they're gifted to do by handing off the work that they were never really called or gifted to do, because that's someone else's role in the body. And so, yeah, this isn't about a pastor getting out of work per se, but it's being able to do more of the right kind of work. And one other thing too, Les, if I can say this under this heading of stop being a full-time pastor, here's another thing that this might be a good place to fit this in. Sometimes we hear from pastors that are internally wrestling with the thought of, man, if I launch a business, I'm being paid full-time. So do I need to have the church cut my salary, and I don't have enough money coming in for my business yet to really be able to sustain that? Or do I need to tell them I'm doing X amount of hours out here? Something that you and I often encourage our pastors that we are speaking into their situation is that your role, pastor, is to produce results for your church, not punch a time clock. Now, this is my opinion, so I'm going to preface it by saying that there are some things you need to have direct and open conversations with. There are other things. John operates off the principle it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So if I'm getting into that place of, I'm now starting to delegate some things, I've got people carrying some things in the church that before I was doing, it's starting to free up my time. I'm not necessarily going to go to my board and say, hey, is it okay if I go out and start this business with this extra time? I'm going to just keep producing the results that I've always been producing. No one in all my years of serving as a church planter and a lead pastor, no one once ever, Les, had to sit down with me and go, are you working hard enough, John? Are you punching enough hours in the time clock? The results spoke for themselves through the leadership that I was offering, the sermons that I was, producing and providing, just the pastoring. People saw that John was putting in the work. I think that's true of the majority of pastors. Maybe there's a few lazy ones out there, but you are called to produce results, not necessarily punch a time clock. And I would avoid any conversation with the board where they're wanting to see, hey, are you giving us the 45 hours a week that we agreed to? That's not a healthy situation if you're in that. So anyway, to whatever pastor, if that lands with you and hopefully you hear what I'm saying, keep doing a great job leading the church. And then as you start to experience this amazing margin by delegating these things to other people, go do the stuff with the margin you need to do and don't ask permission to do it. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
And we'll jump to the next one here in just a second, but something crossed my mind as you were saying that in a practical way, what does that look like on somebody's schedule? Everybody's different. Every situation is different, but here's a scenario. Somebody, pastor, you probably chuckle a little bit when somebody asks you when your day off is. It's yeah, right. What's that? Right. But you probably have somewhere an understanding when you came, or something in a personnel manual, or even a precedent, that's been set by somebody that there's some day that's supposed to be your day off. Well, one of the things that delegation will do is it would allow you to protect that time from overflow or things that didn't get done another time, so you end up doing it on I'm using air quotes too, John, on your day off. Where if you're really wanting to be completely above reproach, if it would bother you to do something during the day and you're just not quite there yet because you're thinking, well, that's time I need to be focusing on ministry stuff or whatever, then you know what delegating will do is protect that time. If, let's say, a day off or evenings or whatever time you want to designate to your marketplace stuff, then you can do that rather than be the person on call and the only person on call. And then your cell phone is, everybody's got it and you're really not going to have that day off. So that's just a practical way that you could implement this.
Yep.
Ready for the next one?
Yeah. So after we cover this first one of stop being the full-time pastor, this next one is also huge. And it again speaks to the leader. And that is this: you need to make a decision that you, pastor, are no longer going to be the primary ministry provider. And this is such an empowering thing because, pastor, you have the ability to do this. You don't need anyone else's permission to make this decision that, you know what, per the word of God and the mandate that I see, the examples that I see set in there, I am not going to be the one that is running myself ragged, doing all of the work of the church. I'm not doing that anymore. Instead, I'm going to be an equiper so that ministry is getting provided, ministry is being done, but I'm not the one that's doing it all anymore. And there's going to be implications that come with that decision. You're going to have to stand behind that. But Pastor, what I want to encourage you with is you've got the support of God's word on your side. There probably will be people on the other side who want to push the boundaries, who want to test that a little bit, but there is a great precedence in Scripture that we see this principle being played out, that delegation is a biblical idea. Delegation, this idea of leaders handing off things to others that are around them to make sure the mission is getting accomplished. There's support for that in Scripture. And so it starts, though, with you making the decision for that to happen. Because Les, I'll drive this home by sharing this, and then you can wrap this up however you want. But at the end of the day, this is a leadership issue. Like if wherever there's a pastor complaining about being overworked and underpaid, the overworked part is a leadership issue. Maybe not the underpaid part, but the overworked piece, that's a choice you've made, Pastor. Those are things that you have accepted conditions to be that way. And the reason that's such an empowering thing is because it puts all of the ability in your court to do something with that. Like, you don't just have to sit back and be a victim of your board or of Gladys or of the system. You actually have the power to make a decision that things are going to be different. That's what happened in my story, Les, many years ago. I just made a decision. And when I called my church together, we kind of had a little family meeting. I apologized to them. I repented to my church for my poor leadership as a pastor. I said, I've not been leading you well. And it has gotten me to the point of almost being burned out here. And I'm sorry for that. And some things are going to change. And then in the course, I go on to share how we walked through step by step this process that when it was all said and done, we had a well-oiled machine of staff. Most of them volunteer, by the way, Pastor. If you're in a small church setting where you're like, we don't have the budget to hire staff, we didn't either. Most of the staff that I'm referring to were not paid staff. They were volunteer staff. And yet the machine was so well running that, it worked great. And like, this thing worked for us. And if I could give this as a gift to so many other pastors, I would love to do that, not just for their financial benefit. Yes, that's awesome. But for the health of their church, this is a biblical thing. So at the end of the day, Les, it's a leadership thing. And that gives you, Pastor, the ability and the power to change this.
Yeah, that's a good word. And there is so much more into what we've covered and more in the course itself. And, we do we're putting our cards on the table. We're being very transparent here to let our people know we want you in the Pastor's Business Alliance for this content and a whole lot more. We know the benefit of it. And Jon, just bluntly, we've put it down there at a level that anybody who really desires to have this content and more can reach it. So why don't you talk about how they can get this course, this content, and a lot more?
Yeah. So the course itself, again, is called A Pastor's Guide to Delegation, and it sits inside of our Pastor's Business Alliance. When Les mentioned a minute ago that this has been priced at a level that really we can't see anybody not being able to be a part of it, what he's saying is it's $9 a month to be a part of our Pastor's Business Alliance. And when you're in that, not only do you have access to our community, not only do you have access to the library of past monthly Q&A calls that we've done. You'll get to be a part of every one of those in the future as Les and John gather together with, I just referred to myself in the third person, as we
well done
together with our community. Isn't that cool? I like that, John. He's all right. You get to be a part of that. And courses like what we're talking about right here, you have access to those at a 50% discount. So Les, I think I'm doing my math right to say this. If someone got into Pastors Business Alliance and simply bought one of these courses, the savings alone would pay for the entire years, if not more, of
and a lot of it's free. A lot of that content, there is no it's part of your membership in Pastors Business Alliance. So the courses and the content that have been a little bit higher ticket or require a little bit more of an investment and skin in the game, those are significantly reduced. So much so that, John, there's a lot of our content, the savings on only one of them, it pays for the entire year.
Absolutely.
for the membership of the $9 a month. So we really did want to make it a no-brainer offer, but we also know the value of having some skin in the game. So that there's some personal accountability to that. You feel it, but it's not so much that it excludes anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So here would be the call to action for this week's podcast episode, is to jump into Pastors Business Alliance, and more specifically, if you are a pastor who's in need of figuring out this delegation thing, if you're like, man, how do I free up my time, whether it's for marketplace ministry or just to be more present with my family, or just to have a healthier church where we're seeing God's people step up into the gifting that they were created for inside the body, I would encourage you to get that course, A Pastor's Guide to Delegation. And you can pay full price for it if you want, but I don't know why you wouldn't jump into Pastors Business Alliance and take advantage of the 50% off discount that is there. So, Pastor, if there's anything specifically around that subject that you're like, well, John, what about this? What about that? Feel free to shoot me or Les an email. We'd love to hear from you. Simply reach out to us at either John or Les at EntrePastors.com. Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group. Answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.